moment ago, they had no idea who I was. Their eyes scanned over me, from my polished black dress shoes to my neatly pressed navy suit, and stopped at the detail they thought didn't belong, the color of my skin. One smug gesture, accompanied by a forced smile, and they politely asked me to leave. I didn't argue, nor did I explain who I truly was. Why should I? The real lesson was yet to unfold. Very soon they would realize that the hotel they were so adamantly guarding against me now belonged to me. Standing at the entrance of the Grand Monarch Hotel, a beacon of luxury nestled in the heart of Dallas, Texas, I couldn't shake the absurdity of the moment. My suit fit perfectly, tailored to a sharp precision. My shoes gleamed like mirrors, and my portfolio boasted achievements most people could only dream. Yet all of that seemed irrelevant against the invisible wall that had just risen before me. It wasn't made of stone or glass, but of human prejudice. A narrow perspective that stopped at my skin. I felt their eyes on me, evaluating, judging, and eventually dismissing me. To them, I was an outsider, a man who had clearly walked through the wrong door. In their carefully curated world of prestige and hospitality, I was an anomaly, an interruption to their image of perfection. This was supposed to be a place of comfort, elegance, and hospitality, yet the air around me was heavy with tension. The staff's cautious stares turned into whispers, and in those moments it became clear I was not just unwelcome, I was a problem. I wasn't angry though. What struck me more than their rejection was how automatic it was. These people judged me not based on who I was, but on their assumptions about what someone like me could be. They hadn't stopped to consider that my story might be different, that the man they were dismissing had built an empire of his own. I didn't need to justify my presence. My story was just beginning. As I stepped onto the cool marble floor of the hotel lobby, each footfall echoed like a quiet defiance. The grandeur of the space was undeniable. Gold chandeliers, plush seating, and flawless design. Yet all I could feel was the cold detachment of those around me. Wealth and luxury here were overshadowed by arrogance. I approached the reception desk, where the manager, a man in his mid-40s with slick-back blonde hair and a faint air of condescension, stood waiting. He had the kind of smile that was more mechanical than genuine. As I approached, I noticed his eyes flicker with recognition, not of who I was, but of what he assumed I represented. "Good afternoon," I said evenly, my voice calm. He blanched up. "I'm sorry, sir, but we don't have any rooms available for you at this time," he replied with a thin veneer of politeness. I wasn't surprised by the rejection, but I was struck by his certainty. He didn't check his system or offer alternatives. His decision was made before I had even spoken. It wasn't his decision alone, though. It was the product of a larger system, one that trained him to see me as less deserving, regardless of my achievements or wealth. I could have spoken my name right then, and the entire situation would have shifted. Apologies would have been rushed, the best suite in the house offered, and complimentary amenities promised. But I didn't. I chose to let their performance play out. I wanted to see how far they were willing to take it. A security guard, tall and broad with a shaved head, approached. His steps were measured, his face neutral, but there was no mistaking the intent in his presence. "Sir, I think it's best if we escort you out," he said, his tone bordering on polite but laced with an underlying firmness. I stood there for a moment, my silence unnerving them. I wanted them to feel the weight of their actions, even if they didn't fully understand it yet. "Thank you," I said calmly, turning and walking out the door. But the story wasn't over, not yet. As I stepped outside and glanced up at the hotel's grand facade, I couldn't help but smile to myself. They didn't know that their day, their reality, was about to shift. Because in my briefcase lay the paperwork that declared me the owner of the Grand Monarch Hotel. This wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was a lesson, and I was about to teach it. The day I decided to begin my little show came unexpectedly, triggered by an innocuous event. A guest, an older woman, was at the front desk, struggling to sort out a booking error. Her reservation had been mishandled, and the staff, led by the same blonde manager, was treating her with the same dismissive arrogance I had experienced weeks before. I stood nearby, unnoticed, watching as the woman's frustration grew. She was polite, even as the manager's tone grew curt and dismissive. "We can't accommodate you tonight, ma'am," he said, crossing his arms. "You should have confirmed your reservation sooner. There's nothing more we can do." She looked defeated, clutching her travel bag tightly, and apologized unnecessarily for what was clearly their mistake. It was the kind of moment that lit a fire in me, the final confirmation that the culture of this place needed an overhaul. I stepped forward, my polished shoes tapping against the marble floor, and cleared my throat. The manager turned to me, his annoyance evident as he glanced at my face and then down to my shoes. That familiar smirk flickered for just a moment before his polite facade returned. "Sir," he said, forcing a smile, "can I help you with something?" "Yes," I said evenly, locking eyes with him. "You can start by accommodating this guest." His brow furrowed in confusion. "I'm sorry, but we're fully booked tonight." "You're not," I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. "And even if you were, a competent manager would find a solution rather than dismiss a guest so rudely." The room grew quiet as heads turned to watch the exchange. The woman looked at me with a mix of surprise and gratitude, while the manager's expression shifted from confusion to irritation. "Sir, I don't think you understand how things work here," he began, his voice rising slightly. "Oh, I understand perfectly," I said, reaching into my pocket and pulling out the documents that declared me the new owner of the hotel. "Allow me to reintroduce myself. My name is Malcolm Evans, and as of last week, I own this hotel." The color drained from his face as he stared at the papers in my hand. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. "I've spent the past few weeks observing how this place operates," I continued, letting my voice carry across the lobby, "and I must say, I'm not impressed. Arrogance, dismissiveness, and a complete lack of hospitality seem to have become the norm here. That changes today." I turned to the woman, giving her a reassuring smile. "Ma'am, I deeply apologize for the inconvenience you've experienced. You'll have a suite on the house tonight, and our team will ensure your stay is as comfortable as possible." She blinked, clearly stunned, before nodding and murmuring a quiet "thank you." The manager stammered, "Mr. Evans, I didn't realize." "Of course you didn't," I said sharply. "You were too busy dismissing me the last time I was here. You didn't recognize me then, and you didn't bother to question your assumptions today." Turning back to the rest of the staff, who were now frozen in place, I addressed them directly. "This is a wake-up call for all of you. The culture of this hotel is about to change. Respect, professionalism, and genuine hospitality will be the standard moving forward. If you're not on board with that, I suggest you hand in your resignation now." The room remained silent as my words settled over them. Some looked ashamed, others fearful, and a few even appeared relieved. I turned to the blonde manager, his face pale and his once confident demeanor shattered. "As for you," I said, my voice cold, "you're dismissed. Effective immediately. Clear out your office by the end of the day." Without waiting for a response, I walked to the front desk, took a notepad, and jotted down a few instructions for the staff. Handing it to the receptionist, I said, "Ensure that the guest suite is ready within the hour, and if she needs anything else, you'll make it happen. Understood?" "Yes, Mr. Evans," the receptionist said quickly, her voice trembling. As I turned to leave, I glanced around the lobby. The faces that once held contempt now reflected shock and uncertainty. They had underestimated me, just as they had underestimated the guests who walked through these doors. This wasn't just about owning a hotel. It was about redefining what this place stood for. The show had begun, and I was determined to see it through to the end. As if searching for an escape, I let the silence linger, allowing the weight of the moment to sink in for everyone. Then I stood, moving slowly toward the front of the room. Each step echoed in the stillness, amplifying the tension. "This isn't how I plan to introduce myself," I said, my voice steady and deliberate, "but perhaps it's better this way. You see, I wanted to see how this team operates when no one is watching, to observe the culture that has been cultivated here." My gaze moved across the room, taking in the wide-eyed faces of the staff. And what I saw was... The manager's lips trembled as he tried to regain composure. "Mr. Evans," he stammered, forcing a weak smile, "I assure you we strive to maintain the highest standards." I raised a hand, silencing him. "Do you? Because what I witnessed on my last visit told a very different story, A story where prejudice overshadowed professionalism, where arrogance took precedence over hospitality. A murmur rippled through the room, employees exchanging uneasy glances. I turned my attention back to the manager. "You," I said, my voice sharpening, "denied me a room, judged me without knowing anything about me. You thought I didn't belong here, didn't you?" The manager's face was a mask of panic now, his once confident demeanor completely shattered. I didn't realize." "Exactly," I cut him off, my tone like steel. "You didn't realize, and that's the problem. You didn't stop to think, to question your assumptions. You acted on bias, and in doing so you failed not just me, but this establishment." I turned to address the rest of the room. This hotel was built on the promise of luxury, comfort, and respect for all who walk through its doors. Yet somewhere along the way that promise was lost. It's time to reclaim. The staff sat in stunned silence, the gravity of my words sinking in. I turned back to the manager, my gaze unflinching. "Effective immediately, you are relieved of your duties. Pack your things and leave by the end of the day." He blinked, stunned. "But Mr. Evans," "No arguments," I said firmly. "You've had your chance to lead, and you failed. This hotel needs a fresh start, and that begins with accountability." The manager's shoulders slumped as he nodded, defeated. He turned and left the room, his departure marked by a silence so heavy it seemed to echo louder than any word. I faced the rest of the staff. "For those of you who remain, let this be a lesson. The old ways of doing things are over. Moving forward, we will operate with integrity, respect, and a commitment to excellence. If you can't align with that vision, you're welcome to leave." No one moved. The room was still, every face a mixture of apprehension and resolve. I allowed myself a small smile. "Good. Now let's get to work. Together, we're going to turn this hotel into a place we can all be proud of." As I left the room, I felt a wave of satisfaction wash over me. This wasn't just about ownership or power, it was about change. The foundation had been laid, and now it was time to rebuild. Not just a hotel, but a culture. In a world that had already moved on without him. I listened intently, nodding occasionally, letting him pour out his desperation. His words were filled with self-justification, attempts to remind me, and perhaps himself, of his worth. "The hotel needs someone like me," he said, his voice faltering. "Someone who understands how it operates, who knows its clientele, my experience." I raised a hand, cutting him off gently but firmly. "Mr. Wallace," I said, using his name for the first time in weeks. "You're not wrong. Experience is valuable, but experience without humility, without the willingness to learn and adapt, is just another burden." His face paled, and I saw the cracks in his armor widen. "I can adapt," he stammered. "I can change. Just tell me what you need from me." I let his words hang in the air for a moment before replying. "What I need, Mr. Wallace, is a team that reflects the values this hotel should stand for: respect, empathy, and a commitment to excellence. Do you think you can embody those values?" He hesitated, his lips pressing into a thin line. For the first time, I saw genuine doubt in his eyes. I can try," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded. "Trying is a start, but it's not enough. Actions speak louder than words, Mr. Wallace. You have a lot to prove, not just to me, but to everyone you've worked with." His shoulders slumped, the weight of his position, or lack thereof, finally sinking in. "I understand," he said. "Just give me a chance." I studied him for a moment, deciding how far I wanted to extend this olive branch. "You'll have your chance," I said, my tone measured. "But understand this, there are no guarantees. Your actions will determine your future here." He nodded, the fight in him replaced by something resembling acceptance. As he turned to leave, I called out, "Oh, and one more thing, Mr. Wallace." He stopped and looked back at me, his expression wary. "Humility isn't just about acknowledging your mistakes," I said. "It's about making amends for them. Start with that." He nodded again and walked away, his step slower, his head slightly bowed. The rest of the staff had been watching from a distance, their curiosity barely concealed, I addressed them as a group. "Let today be a turning point," I said. "This hotel is not just a business, it's a reflection of everyone who works here. If you can't align yourselves with the new direction we're heading in, you're free to leave. But if you're willing to grow, to learn, and to contribute meaningfully, then we'll make this place something extraordinary together." There was a murmur of acknowledgement, and I saw a mix of apprehension and determination on their faces. The seeds of change had been planted, and now it was time to see who would rise to the challenge. As I walked away, I felt a sense of closure. This wasn't just about reclaiming dignity or power. It was about creating something better, something lasting. And as the hotel's owner, I knew that the real transformation was only just beginning. In the air, the room was silent except for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. As I entered, all eyes turned to me. Some were filled with curiosity, others with apprehension, and a few with barely concealed fear. I stood at the head of the long conference table, my gaze slowly moving across the faces of my staff. These were the people who had once dismissed me, judged me, and even outright denied my presence. Now, they were about to face the consequences of their actions, not as punishment, but as a necessary lesson. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice calm but firm. "I've observed each of you closely over the past few weeks. I've seen how you've handled the changes I've implemented, how you've interacted with one another, and how you've reacted under pressure." I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, others avoided my gaze entirely. "What I've witnessed," I continued, "is not just a failure to adapt, but a failure to uphold the very values this hotel should represent: integrity, teamwork, and respect. Instead, I've seen dishonesty, sabotage, and arrogance. And that ends today." The room remained silent, the tension thick and unyielding. The manager, Mr. Wallace, sat at the far end of the table, his face pale and his hands nervously clutching a pen. He, more than anyone, understood the gravity of what was happening. "I call this meeting," I said, "not to embarrass or humiliate anyone, but to make it clear that this hotel is entering a new era. An era where accountability is non-negotiable and respect is the foundation of everything we do." I turned my attention to Mr. Wallace, locking eyes with him. "Mr. Wallace," I said, "you've been here the longest, and as such, you've set the tone for the culture of this establishment. Unfortunately, that tone has been one of exclusion and elitism. Effective immediately, you are relieved of your duties." A gasp rippled through the room. Wallace's face turned red and he began to stammer, "But I raised a hand to silence him. "Your time here has shown me that you are not the leader this team needs. You prioritized your own comfort over the well-being of your colleagues and our guests. This decision is final." Wallace stood abruptly, his chair screeching against the floor. "You think you can just replace me?" he snapped, his composure crumbling. "I've given everything to this place." "And yet," I replied evenly, "you've given nothing of value. Your leadership has been built on arrogance and fear, and that's not the legacy this hotel will continue." He stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. The remaining employees sat in stunned silence, their expressions a mix of shock and uncertainty. Turning back to the group, I softened my tone. "For the rest of you, consider this a fresh start. I'm not here to destroy careers, I'm here to build a team. But that requires honesty, humility, and a commitment to excellence. If you're willing to embrace those values, you'll have my full support. If not, I won't hesitate to make further changes." One by one, the employees nodded, some hesitantly, others with determination. They understood the message. The old ways were gone, and a new chapter had begun. As the meeting concluded, I left the conference room feeling a sense of closure. This was more than just a personal victory. It was the first step in transforming the hotel into a place where everyone, regardless of their background, could feel valued and respected. Walking through the lobby, I noticed the staff moving with a renewed sense of purpose. The changes wouldn't happen overnight, but the foundation had been laid. This wasn't just about reclaiming what was once denied to me. It was about building something greater than myself. And for the first time, the hotel felt like it was truly mine. And yet, he had no choice but to comply. The moment was symbolic. A man once consumed by arrogance and prejudice, now humbled, forced to confront the consequences of his actions in the most personal way. I stood nearby, observing the interaction. The family remained polite and cordial, unaware of the significance of the moment to the man behind the counter. The mother smiled at him, her warmth in stark contrast to his discomfort. Her children giggled softly, excited for their stay, and their innocent joy only seemed to deepen his unease. As the manager completed their check-in, fumbling with the keys and papers, he handed them over with a weak smile. "Enjoy your stay," he managed to say, though his voice was almost a whisper. The father nodded in appreciation. "Thank you," he said sincerely, taking the keys and leading his family toward the elevator. The manager watched them go, his shoulders slumping as they disappeared from view. I approached him, my steps deliberate but silent. When he turned and saw me, his expression was a mix of shame and defeat. "This is hard," he admitted quietly, his voice barely audible. I crossed my arms and looked at him, letting the weight of his admission settle. "Hard," I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Imagine how hard it was for the people you dismissed, the ones you judged before even giving them a chance. Now you're feeling a fraction of what they endured." He looked down, unable to meet my gaze. I didn't realize," he stammered, his words heavy with regret. "That's the problem," I said, my tone calm but firm. "You didn't realize because you never bothered to see. But now you have no choice. Every interaction, every moment like this, is a chance for you to change. It's not just about doing your job, it's about understanding the impact of your actions." The manager nodded slowly, his face flushed with embarrassment. For the first time, he seemed to genuinely reflect on his behavior. It was a small step, but it was as I walked away, I felt a sense of accomplishment. The transformation I sought wasn't just about the hotel. It was about changing the hearts and minds of those within it. The world wouldn't change overnight, but moments like these were the foundation. The new staff, empowered and confident, began to shape the culture of the hotel. Guests noticed the shift in atmosphere, a warmth and inclusivity that hadn't been there before. The old guard, though resistant at first, started to adapt, realizing that the days of unchecked arrogance were over. Weeks later, I found myself in the lobby once more. The same family who had checked in during that symbolic moment approached me, their smiles genuine and full of gratitude. "We had a wonderful stay," the father said, shaking my hand. "Your staff is incredible, and this place feels different. It feels welcoming." "Thank you," I replied, my heart swelling with pride. "That's exactly what we're striving for." As they left, I glanced toward the manager. He stood nearby, quietly observing. Our eyes met, and he gave me a small nod, a gesture of acknowledgement, perhaps even respect. The journey wasn't over, but the change was undeniable. This hotel, once a symbol of exclusion, was becoming something greater. A place of acceptance, growth, and unity. And in that transformation, I found not only justice, but hope. Remained seated, their gazes fixed on me. These were the ones who had started to understand that their old way of thinking, their previous arrogance, had no place in this hotel anymore. They didn't look defiant, but they didn't look broken either. Perhaps, deep down, they recognized this as an opportunity to grow, to change, to let go of the toxic superiority they once clung to. I scanned the room, giving each person a moment to reflect. The silence was heavy, punctuated only by the faint hum of the air conditioning. Finally, one of them, a middle-aged woman named Linda, who had worked in the administrative department for over a decade, spoke up. "I'd like to stay," she said hesitantly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want to prove that I can be better, that I can contribute to this hotel in a way that aligns with the new vision." Her hands trembled slightly as she spoke, but there was sincerity in her words. She wasn't making excuses or deflecting blame. She was owning her flaws and asking for a second chance. I nodded. "That's a start, Linda, but words alone won't suffice. Your actions will determine your place here moving forward." Linda nodded solemnly, and a ripple of murmurs spread across the room. A younger man, Eric, who had once been vocal in his dismissal of the new policies, stood up. He was in his late 20s, ambitious but misguided by the toxic culture that had thrived here for years. "I want to stay too," he said, his tone more confident than Linda's. "I've realized that the way we operated before, it wasn't right. I want to learn how to do better, not just for myself, but for the team." His declaration seemed to embolden a few others, who nodded in agreement. Yet, there were still those who remained silent, their gazes fixed on the floor, unwilling or unable to meet my eyes. I took a deep breath and addressed them all. "This isn't just about keeping your jobs, it's about transforming yourselves. The culture we're building here is one of respect, equality, and collaboration. If you can't align with those values, this isn't the place for you, and that's okay. But know this, if you choose to stay, there will be no room for the old ways." A man in his early 60s, Mr. Harris, who had been the head of the housekeeping department for years, slowly rose from his chair. He was one of the few who had maintained a neutral stance during all the changes, but hadn't shown any willingness to adapt. "I think it's time for me to go," he said, his voice steady but tired. "This hotel is moving in a direction I don't think I can follow. I've spent too long doing things a certain way, and I'm not sure I can change." I respected his honesty. "Thank you for your service, Mr. Harris. I wish you well in whatever path you choose next." One by one, others began to make their decisions. Some chose to leave, their pride or resistance to change too great to overcome. Others stayed, committing to the new vision I had laid out. By the end of the meeting, the room felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. The division between the old and the new was clear, and I knew we were finally moving forward. As the remaining employees filed out of the conference room, I lingered for a moment, reflecting on what had just transpired. This wasn't the end of the journey. It was only the beginning. The real work of rebuilding this hotel and its culture lay ahead, but I was ready for it. I looked out the large windows that framed the city skyline, the sunlight streaming in as a symbol of new beginnings. This hotel, once a place that thrived on exclusivity and prejudice, was now on the path to becoming something greater, a beacon of inclusion, respect, and excellence. And in that moment, I felt a sense of peace. Not triumph, but peace. Justice had been served, and now the real transformation could begin. As I stood there watching the door close behind him, I felt a wave of finality wash over me. The man who had once embodied arrogance and prejudice was now just a shadow of his former self. He had been stripped of the facade he wore so proudly, left with nothing but the truth he could no longer ignore. It wasn't triumph I felt, but a solemn sense of balance being restored. I turned and looked around the lobby. It felt different now, less suffocating, less cold. The employees who remained were moving with purpose, their interactions noticeably more respectful and genuine. There was still tension, of course, but it was the kind of tension that accompanies growth, not resistance. Change was taking root, slowly but surely. Linda, one of the employees who had chosen to stay, approached me cautiously. "Sir," she said, her voice steady but tinged with humility, "I just wanted to thank you for giving us a chance to prove ourselves. I know we have a long way to go, but I promise we won't let you down." I nodded, appreciating her sincerity. "It's not about proving yourselves to me, Linda," I replied. "It's about proving to yourselves that you're capable of more. This place can be a reflection of who you choose to become, not who you were." As she walked away, I thought about the journey ahead. It wasn't going to be easy. There would be missteps, resistance, and moments of doubt. But for the first time, I felt hopeful. This wasn't just about rebuilding a hotel. It was about redefining what it stood for. The marble floors and golden chandeliers might catch the eye, but the true beauty of this place would lie in the people who made it work. I walked to the large windows overlooking the city, the late afternoon sunlight casting long shadows across the lobby. The hotel now symbolized something far greater than luxury. It represented the possibility of change, the power of justice, and the strength it takes to rebuild from the ashes of old prejudices. As I stood there, I knew this was just the beginning. The real work was only starting, but I was ready. We all were. The story serves as a powerful reminder that true strength lies in how we respond to prejudice and challenges. In life, we often encounter individuals or systems that underestimate us based on preconceived notions. The key takeaway is not to let those moments define us, but to use them as fuel, to rise above and redefine the narrative. Like the protagonist in the story, instead of reacting with anger or seeking immediate revenge, we can choose a path of quiet resolve and strategic action. This approach not only protects our dignity, but also sets an example for others, showcasing the transformative power of patience, justice, and resilience. In your own life, if you face situations where you feel undervalued or judged unfairly, take a step back and reflect. Ask yourself how you can turn the experience into an opportunity for growth, both for yourself and for those around you. Focus on building something meaningful, be it relationships, a career, or personal character, that challenges stereotypes and inspires change. Remember, true justice isn't about tearing others down, it's about lifting yourself up in a way that transforms the environment for the better. Let your actions speak louder than your words and become a catalyst for positive transformation.